The encounter. The stars gleamed brightly against the dark sky as Ethan, a rugged and resilient engineer in his mid-40s, tightened the last bolt on his latest project. A soft breeze stirred the leaves around his secluded cabin, bringing with it a faint sound of distant rustling. The night was still, and yet an unusual energy seemed to hang in the air. As he wiped the sweat from his brow and took a moment to admire his handiwork, a sudden flash lit up the sky, streaking across the horizon in a fiery blaze. Ethan's eyes followed the object as it tore through the night, heading toward the dense forest near his cabin. Seconds later, the earth shook with a heavy, muffled thud, as if something massive had just collided with the ground. His heart raced as curiosity overtook caution. Grabbing a flashlight, he set off toward the forest, his instincts sharpened by years of survival in both urban and wild landscapes. Though he had left his old life behind for the peace of isolation, old habits and a relentless sense of curiosity were not so easily abandoned. Branches and underbrush caught his clothes as he pushed forward, the scent of burnt earth and smoke growing stronger with every step. The faint glow from the impact site illuminated the trees around him, casting eerie shadows that danced across his path. Finally, he stepped into a small clearing and halted, breathless and stunned. Before him lay a sleek, oval-shaped craft embedded in the ground, its metallic surface shimmering with colors that seemed to pulse and flow. The design was unlike any aircraft he had ever seen. No wings, no visible engines, just a smooth, iridescent shell that glowed softly in the dark. The sight was both beautiful and intimidating, a mesmerizing mystery from beyond the stars. As he moved closer, he noticed a figure sprawled near the wreckage, lying still on the scorched ground. Cautiously, he approached, squinting to make sense of the scene before him. The figure was humanoid yet distinctly alien, with skin that shimmered like polished metal under the dim light. She was injured, blood, though not the red he expected, trickling down her side, staining the ground beneath her. Her face, despite its otherworldly features, wore an expression of pain and vulnerability. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to leave, to avoid getting involved in something far beyond his understanding. But something deeper, a sense of duty and compassion, rooted him to the spot. He had seen enough suffering in his life to recognize it, and he couldn't bring himself to turn away from someone in need, no matter how alien they appeared. Kneeling beside her, he reached out, careful and slow, hoping to convey that he meant no harm. Her eyes fluttered open, a shade of vibrant blue-green that seemed to glow softly in the dark, filled with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. She spoke, her voice soft and musical, though he could make no sense of the words. He held his hands up in a universal gesture of peace, nodding gently. "I'm here to help," he said, unsure if she could understand. "You're hurt. Let me help you." Her gaze softened slightly, the tension in her body easing as if she understood, or perhaps simply sensed his intentions. Gently, he slipped an arm onto her, lifting her as carefully as he could, trying not to jostle her injured side. She winced, her body tensing with pain, but she didn't resist. As he carried her back toward his cabin, he couldn't shake the awe and wonder stirring within him. Here he was, a simple man in the forest, carrying a being from another world in his arms, a being who, against all odds, had found herself in need of his help. By the time he reached the cabin, her eyes had drifted shut, her breathing shallow and labored. Ethan gently laid her on the bed and went to work, gathering what little medical supplies he had. This was beyond his expertise, but he was determined to try. Carefully, he cleaned the wound, applying pressure to stem the bleeding and bandaging her as best as he could. Her skin was cool and smooth, unlike anything he felt before, and yet there was a warmth that pulsed faintly beneath the surface. As he worked, he found himself marveling at her features. Despite the alien aspects of her appearance, she was undeniably beautiful in a way he had never seen. There was a softness to her face, a vulnerability that struck a chord deep within him. She was here, in his cabin, a reminder of a universe far larger and more mysterious than he could comprehend. And in that moment, as he looked at her peaceful face, he felt an unexpected bond, a connection that transcended words or species. Hours passed, and dawn's first light crept through the windows, casting a gentle glow over the cabin. The alien woman stirred, her eyes fluttering open to meet his. This time, there was no fear in her gaze, only a quiet gratitude, a mutual understanding that neither of them needed to voice. Ethan offered her a reassuring smile. "You're safe here," he said softly. "I'll help you." Though they couldn't speak the same language, the message seemed to pass between them, and she offered a faint nod in return. The language of trust. Ethan woke to the soft sound of shifting fabric, and his eyes adjusted to the dim light of early morning, where he saw the alien woman struggling to sit up. Her face showed signs of both discomfort and determination. Despite her wounds, it was clear she was a resilient creature, unwilling to remain still or helpless for long. Ethan moved quietly, not wanting to startle her, but her sharp gaze darted to him, wary but aware. "Easy," he murmured, lifting his hands in a calming gesture. "You're hurt. You need to rest." She watched him, her eyes filled with a cautious curiosity. Her lips moved, forming unfamiliar words that flowed like a soft melody, resonant with tones that didn't match any language he knew. Though he couldn't understand, he nodded, acknowledging her efforts. He slowly pointed to himself. "Ethan," he said, his voice gentle, as he tapped his chest. The woman's eyes flickered with understanding, and she tilted her head, almost studying him as she repeated his name softly. Her accent was delicate, as if his name was a new sound on her tongue. He could sense that she wanted to communicate, that she too felt the importance of bridging the chasm between their worlds. A thought struck him, and he picked up a small notepad from the table, sketching a rudimentary map of Earth's solar system with his pencil. He pointed to Earth, then to himself. Her gaze followed his every movement, intense and focused. Then, with surprising dexterity, she took the pencil from him and began drawing. An intricate series of circles, symbols, and shapes that spiraled outward like a galaxy. Her hand flowed across the paper, revealing an elaborate constellation system beyond his comprehension. Ethan watched, mesmerized. Her world, her universe, was far more complex than he could fathom. And though he didn't understand the symbols, he understood the meaning. She was from somewhere far, far away. Finishing her drawing, she pointed to a particular mark, then to herself, her gaze steady and clear. In that one gesture, she revealed her identity, her origin. The weight of it struck Ethan. He wasn't just in the presence of a foreign being. He was in the company of someone who had traveled unimaginable distances, who carried with her the knowledge and secrets of distant worlds. Ethan realized he had no choice but to bring her into his life fully, at least until she was strong enough to leave. He gently gestured for her to lie back, and though she hesitated, she eventually complied, her gaze softened, as though beginning to trust him. Over the next few days, they settled into a silent rhythm. Ethan cared for her wounds, and though her skin and physiology were unlike anything he had encountered, he discovered that, at her core, she healed much like humans did. He cleaned her bandages, brought her water and food, and observed with a scientist's curiosity the small yet meaningful expressions she made in response to his kindness. Each day, her condition improved, and with it, her demeanor began to shift from cautious and guarded to something softer, more open. One evening, as twilight fell, and they sat in the cabin's dim, cozy warmth, she began to sing. Her voice was ethereal, otherworldly, rising and falling in tones that stirred emotions within Ethan he couldn't name. The melody seemed to transcend language, touching something deep within him, evoking memories of distant places he had never seen and emotions he didn't know he held. In that song, he felt her sorrow, her longing, her hope, and a silent gratitude that needed no words. Moved by her song, Ethan picked up his old acoustic guitar, a relic from his youth that he hadn't touched in years. He strummed a few tentative chords, feeling the rusty strings vibrate under his fingers, joining her melody in a soft harmony. Though their music came from different worlds, Somehow, it blended together, creating a sound that felt timeless and universal. As they played, Ethan felt a bridge forming between them, one that didn't rely on words or even understanding, but rather on trust, shared experience, and an inexplicable connection that spanned galaxies. The next morning, as he was checking her bandages, the woman reached out and touched his hand. Her fingers were cool, her touch light, but the gesture was one of undeniable gratitude. She looked him in the eyes and spoke a single word, repeating it until he understood she was trying to share something meaningful. Ethan listened carefully, watching her lips, and tried to mimic the word back to her. She nodded, a faint smile bracing her face, and in that moment he realized she had just taught him her name. "Naira," he repeated, testing the sound. Her smile widened, and for the first time she relaxed completely in his presence, as if revealing her name had somehow eased the distance between them. They spent the day attempting to exchange more words, simple concepts like food, water, and thank you. Though the progress was slow, each new word felt like a triumph, a small victory over the barriers that separated them. For Ethan, it was both a challenge and a joy, reigniting a sense of purpose and wonder he had long thought lost. Naira, too, seemed more at ease, occasionally laughing at his clumsy attempts at her language or gesturing in ways that conveyed her amusement. As the days turned into weeks, Naira's strength returned, and Ethan marveled at the subtle transformation in her. She moved with a grace he had never seen, an elegance that seemed almost ethereal, as if she belonged to the stars rather than the earth. But there was also a growing sadness in her gaze, a quiet yearning that hinted at a loneliness too profound to name. One evening, as they sat beneath the open sky, gazing at the stars above, Naira gestured toward the heavens. Her voice, though soft, held a weight that Ethan could feel, even if he couldn't understand her words. She pointed to her drawing of the constellation system on the notepad and traced her finger back to Earth, as if trying to convey her journey, or perhaps the enormity of the distance between her home and this small green planet. Ethan listened, his heart heavy with the knowledge that, while they had built a bridge between them, it could never truly span the vastness of space. In that moment, he realized that Nero would eventually leave, that this connection, however profound, was fleeting. But he also knew he wouldn't trade a single moment of it. Nero had opened his eyes to a universe far beyond his understanding, and he had given her shelter, friendship, and perhaps a sliver of comfort in a foreign land. Their bond, though temporary, was a testament to the resilience and beauty of human compassion and the quiet power of trust. As the night deepened, Ethan reached out, covering her hand with his own. Though he couldn't offer her a path back to her world, he could offer her a small piece of his, and for now that was enough. The first lessons. The following days were filled with a newfound sense of purpose for both Ethan and Naira. With her strength returning, Naira seemed more eager to learn, and Ethan became her patient teacher, showing her the small, simple parts of his world. Although the language barrier remained, they found ways to understand each other through gestures, expressions, and the occasional word they managed to learn together. Their exchanges grew richer, as though the rhythm of their shared time had given rise to a new language, one born of necessity, kindness, and trust. One afternoon, as the sun bathed the cabin in warm light, Naira motioned for Ethan to follow her outside. She had noticed his habit of working with tools and engines, and a curiosity had taken root in her. She wanted to understand, to see what he saw in these strange, mechanical contraptions he spent hours tinkering with. Ethan was both surprised and intrigued by her interest. Naira's world, he imagined, was likely far beyond anything Earth's technology could offer. Still, he could see genuine fascination in her eyes as she studied his work, curious about how a man from a planet so far removed from her own understood the world around him. Ethan led her to his small workshop, where various tools lay scattered among half-finished projects. He grabbed an old engine part he'd been tinkering with, turning it over in his hands before showing it to her. Slowly and carefully, he pointed to each part, mimicking its purpose with gestures, hoping she'd catch on. To his surprise, Naira caught on quickly, nodding as if in understanding. She seemed deeply focused, her eyes sharp and perceptive, taking in the details as if each one revealed a piece of an unseen puzzle. When he was sure she understood the basics, Ethan set the engine part down and picked up a screwdriver, demonstrating how it worked. To his amusement, Nera was quick to mimic him, holding the tool and attempting to unscrew a bolt with her slender, nimble fingers. Her attempts were clumsy at first, but he could see her determination, and within minutes she had succeeded, a triumphant smile lighting up her face. Encouraged by her enthusiasm, Ethan began showing her other tools, explaining their purposes with exaggerated gestures and simple words. Nera listened with unwavering attention, nodding occasionally, her gaze never straying from his. It was as if she were absorbing not only the knowledge he was offering, but also something deeper, something intangible yet vital to her understanding of this world. As they worked together, Ethan noticed that Nera's mind seemed incredibly adaptive, capable of grasping complex ideas even without words. She studied him with a keen eye, picking up on the subtle details he hadn't even thought to explain. There was something deeply satisfying in these shared moments, a silent collaboration that transcended language and culture. For Ethan, it was more than just teaching her about tools. It was about showing her the essence of human ingenuity, of problem-solving with the simplest means. One evening, after they had spent hours in the workshop, Nera suddenly stood and gestured for him to wait. She slipped out of the cabin, returning a few minutes later with a small device in her hand, something sleek and metallic, clearly crafted from materials he couldn't recognize. She placed it on the table before him, her eyes sparkling with excitement as she activated it with a gentle tap. To Ethan's astonishment, a three-dimensional holographic image appeared above the device, displaying a star map more detailed and beautiful than anything he had ever seen. Nebulas glowed with colors that defied description, stars pulsed gently, and lines connected celestial bodies in patterns that seemed to represent trade routes or pathways through space. It was a window into her world, her universe, and it took his breath away. She pointed to a particular section of the map, then gestured to herself, as if to indicate that this was where she was from. Ethan stared in awe, struggling to grasp the magnitude of what he was seeing. This wasn't just a map. This was a glimpse into a reality far beyond his own, a realm of stars and planets he couldn't even imagine. Overwhelmed, Ethan pointed to the map and then to himself, his expression one of bewildered curiosity. How did you get here?" he managed, his voice filled with wonder. Nara looked at him, her gaze softening as she considered his question. Then, in slow, deliberate movements, she began to show him, using her hands to mimic the gesture of a ship descending through space, indicating turbulence, and finally gesturing toward the ground as if to illustrate a crash. Ethan watched, mesmerized, piecing together the story she was sharing. She had come here by accident, a journey interrupted, a forced landing that had left her stranded on his world. Understanding her story, Ethan felt a wave of empathy for Nera. She was a traveler, far from home, navigating an alien world alone and injured. Her resilience was remarkable, but he could sense the longing in her eyes, the homesickness that had likely haunted her since her arrival. It was a feeling he understood all too well, having left behind his own life to seek solitude in these woods. Perhaps, he mused, they weren't so different after all. In the days that followed, Ethan found ways to bring her small comforts, hoping to make her stay in his world a little easier. He showed her his favorite spots near the cabin, the brook that babbled nearby, the meadow that bloomed with wildflowers, and the hill that offered a clear view of the stars. Nera seemed to find solace in these quiet places, her gaze often lingering on the sky, her thoughts wandering far beyond his reach. One evening, as they sat by the brook, she gestured to the stars, her expression wistful. Then, with careful movements, she reached into the grass and picked a wildflower, holding it delicately between her fingers. She looked at him, her gaze questioning, as if to ask if this small, earthly thing had meaning. Ethan smiled, plucking a flower himself and offering it to her. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he said softly, though he knew she couldn't understand his words. But something in his tone must have resonated, for she nodded, tucking the flower gently behind her ear with a faint smile. Their days grew into a routine of shared learning. Nira taught Ethan simple phrases from her language, sounds that rolled off his tongue awkwardly, but made her laugh with amusement. In return, he taught her words in English, watching as her vocabulary expanded slowly but surely. Each word was a bridge, a link between their worlds, and with every new phrase they shared, they grew closer, their understanding of each other deepening in ways that transcended language. One night, as they sat in the quiet of the cabin, Nira pointed to herself and said her name softly, as if reminding him. Then she gestured toward him, her eyes warm with the question she had never asked aloud. "Ethan," he replied, his voice low and gentle. She repeated his name with a smile, and in that moment he felt a strange, powerful connection, a bond that was more than just friendship, a kinship between two souls adrift in a vast universe. For Ethan, Nira had become more than just a visitor from the stars. She was a presence that filled his solitude with warmth and meaning. And though he knew she might one day leave, he cherished every moment they shared, every new word, every discovery, every quiet smile. A glimmer of hope. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan and Nira settled into a comfortable routine that wove their lives together in unexpected ways. Their evenings spent under the stars became sacred rituals, moments where the vastness of the universe felt a little smaller, a little friendlier. Ethan found himself looking forward to these moments more than he could have imagined. They often sat in silence, simply absorbing the beauty above them, but other times they shared stories. He with his tales of earthly adventures, she with her silent gestures and drawings that painted vivid pictures of worlds he could never hope to visit. One night, as they lounged outside on a blanket spread across the grass, Ethan noticed that Nira seemed more contemplative than usual. She stared up at the stars with an intensity that suggested she was searching for something, perhaps a connection to her home or a way to return. Ethan's heart ached for her. He wished he could give her what she longed for. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as though he feared shattering the tranquility of the night. Nira turned to him, her luminous eyes reflecting the starlight. She smiled softly but didn't answer. Instead, she reached for his hand, entwining her fingers with his, as if to draw comfort from his presence. It was a simple gesture, yet it felt monumental, bridging the gap between their vastly different worlds. Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "I wish I could help you find your way back," he confessed. "But until then, I want you to feel at home here too." In response, she pointed to a particularly bright star, then back to herself and then to him. Her intent was clear. She was telling him she was not alone. The star shone like a beacon in the dark sky, and for Nira, it represented hope, an anchor in the vastness of space. Ethan felt a surge of determination. He wanted to be that anchor for her. Over the following days, they worked tirelessly to transform Ethan's cabin into a place that could provide comfort and a sense of belonging for Nira. They decorated the walls with drawings she created, intricate images of celestial bodies and beautiful alien landscapes, mingled with sketches of Ethan's world. Each piece of art was a conversation starter, a fusion of their experiences, and a visual testament to their growing bond. Ethan, too, contributed. He painted a mural on one of the cabin walls depicting a sprawling landscape that combined elements of both their worlds. Towering mountains reminiscent of Nira's home alongside the familiar rolling hills of Earth. It was an homage to their shared journey and an expression of unity amidst the differences that set them apart. Their collaboration ignited something within Ethan, a surge of creativity he hadn't tapped into for years. The project became a beautiful distraction, pulling them away from the weight of uncertainty and toward a shared vision of beauty and connection. With each stroke of the brush, they forged a new narrative, one that defied the odds and allowed their spirits to dance freely in the face of adversity. As the mural neared completion, Nira seemed to blossom. With every passing day, her laughter rang out more frequently, her smile growing brighter as they uncovered new facets of each other. She brought a sense of vibrancy to Ethan's life, a reminder of the beauty that existed beyond the constraints of everyday worries. She challenged him to view the world through different lenses, to find wonder in the mundane, and to rediscover joy in simple moments. One day, while exploring the nearby woods, Nira stumbled upon a small clearing filled with wildflowers of every color. The sight captivated her, and she danced among the blooms, her movements fluid and graceful. Ethan watched, entranced by the way she seemed to embrace the moment, the way her laughter mingled with the rustling leaves and the chirping of the birds. He joined her, twirling her around playfully as they danced together in the sun-drenched meadow. It was a moment of pure joy, a fleeting escape from the reality that lay just beyond the treetops. Ethan felt as if time stood still, and for that brief moment, they were not a human and an alien. They were simply two souls celebrating the beauty of life and each other. As twilight approached, Ethan grew contemplative, realizing how much their connection had deepened. But he was also acutely aware of the looming question that hung in the air between them. What would happen when the time came for Nira to leave? Would she be able to return home? And would he ever see her again? As if sensing his thoughts, Nira reached for his hand and led him to a massive oak tree at the edge of the clearing. Beneath its sprawling branches, she began to draw in the dirt with her fingers, creating symbols that resembled the star map she had shown him before. Ethan leaned closer, trying to decipher her intricate designs as she worked, her brow furrowed in concentration. Finally, she looked up at him, her expression earnest and filled with purpose. She pointed to the various symbols and began to create a connection in his mind, trying to show him the potential for travel between their worlds. Ethan's heart raced with excitement and fear as he began to understand. Nira was suggesting that there might be a way to repair her ship. Perhaps if they could gather the right materials, if they could recreate the technology that had brought her here, she could go home. A surge of hope filled Ethan as the realization sank in. "You mean we can fix it?" he asked, his voice barely containing his excitement. Nira nodded, her eyes shining with determination. Together, they could construct a means for her to return home. Fueled by this newfound mission, they devoted themselves to finding the necessary resources. They combed through the forest, gathering scrap metal, discarded materials, and anything else that could be repurposed for Nira's ship. Ethan's engineering skills proved invaluable, and together they transformed the wreckage into something that could potentially work. Each day brought them closer to a solution, igniting their spirits and filling their hearts with a renewed sense of purpose. But as the days turned into weeks, Ethan couldn't shake the bittersweet feeling that lingered in the back of his mind. With every step toward repairing Nira's ship, he felt the weight of impending separation. Each moment spent together was a precious memory he would cherish, but it was also a reminder of what lay ahead. One night, as they worked late into the evening, Ethan paused to gaze at Nira, who was absorbed in her task, her delicate fingers deftly manipulating the metal components. She looked so at home, so vibrant and alive, that it took his breath away. A sudden rush of emotion washed over him, and he found himself compelled to speak the truth he had kept hidden. "Nira," he began, his voice trembling slightly. She looked up, her expression curious. "I don't want you to leave." She blinked, surprise flickering across her features. For a moment, he feared he had overstepped, but then she reached out and touched his hand, her warmth grounding him. "I don't want to leave either," she replied, her voice soft yet filled with conviction. Though the words were simple, the weight of their shared understanding hung in the air between them. In that moment, they both realized that while Nira's journey was important, the bond they had forged was equally significant. No matter what the future held, they had created a world of their own, one that transcended their origins. And as long as they were together, they would find a way to navigate whatever came next, whether that meant repairing her ship or exploring the depths of their connection even further. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, casting their gentle light upon the forest, Ethan felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. Their journey was far from over, and while uncertainties lay ahead, They would face them together, side by side. The departure. The weeks flew by like whispers in the wind, each day marking progress toward Nera's ship's revival. The forest had become a sacred sanctuary for Ethan and Nera, a place where laughter echoed, ideas blossomed, and a profound connection grew between them. They had established their own rhythm, each task a duet of creativity and collaboration. But as their project neared completion, an unspoken tension settled in the air, thickening like fog that refused to lift. Ethan felt the weight of time pressing down on him. Each day he spent with Nera was both a blessing and a reminder of the inevitable farewell that loomed ahead. The more he learned about her, the more he cherished their time together. She had become a light in his once quiet world, illuminating corners of his heart he hadn't known were dark. But with every sunrise came the realization that soon she would leave, and that thought gnawed at him like a relentless tide. One evening, as they gathered materials from the forest, Ethan caught Nera watching him. The way her eyes lingered on him, filled with warmth and something deeper, sent a shiver of awareness through him. He paused, turning to meet her gaze, and in that moment, the silence spoke volumes. They were both aware that the end of this chapter was approaching, but the thought of saying goodbye felt like a jagged stone lodged in his throat. "Are you ready?" he asked cautiously, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. She nodded, but there was a hint of sadness in her expression, a shadow that suggested she wasn't entirely convinced of the path ahead. Nera pointed to her makeshift ship, which they had painstakingly rebuilt over the past weeks, now gleaming under the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees. It was a remarkable transformation. What had once been a wreckage of metal and despair was now a vessel of hope and resilience, ready to take her home. Ethan tried to ignore the tightening in his chest as he watched her inspect the ship, her fingers brushing the surfaces as if bidding farewell to each piece of it. "We've done something amazing together," he said, striving to inject a sense of optimism into the moment. "This ship is your ticket home, and you deserve to go back to your world." She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears, and he felt his heart crack at the sight. "Home," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "But what about you?" Ethan didn't have an answer. He was acutely aware that her home was light years away, and his was here, bound to the earth he had come to know and love, though without her it would feel hollow. "I'll be fine," he managed, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You have to go back. You need to find your family, your friends." Nera shook her head, frustration flashing across her face. She stepped closer, and Ethan could see the depth of her emotions reflected in her gaze. "But I want to stay," she insisted, her voice trembling. "I've learned so much here. You mean so much to me." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The honesty in her words took him by surprise. They had never explicitly defined what they were to each other, but he had felt it, the connection, the bond that went beyond mere friendship. "I don't want you to go," he finally confessed, his voice raw and earnest. "But I can't ask you to give up your home. You belong to the stars." A moment of silence stretched between them, heavy with unsaid words and a million emotions. Nera stepped back, looking away, her expression clouded with turmoil. It was a painful moment of clarity, the realization that their worlds were still too different, that her duty to return home was woven into the very fabric of who she was. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the clearing, they continued to work on the ship in silence, each absorbed in their thoughts. Ethan focused on tightening screws and securing panels, while Nera sat cross-legged nearby, sketching the stars on a piece of bark, trying to immortalize this moment as if to keep it alive forever. The days turned into a blur of activity as they raced against time. Nera worked tirelessly, ensuring every part of her ship was functioning, while Ethan contributed his mechanical skills, lending a human touch to the alien technology. Each time they completed a task, it felt like a victory tinged with impending loss. The closer they got to finishing, the more Ethan felt the knot of anxiety in his stomach tighten. Finally, The day arrived when the ship was ready for its maiden flight. They stood before it, both filled with anticipation and dread. Nora's expression was a mixture of joy and sorrow, and Ethan's heart ached at the thought of what was to come. The ship stood tall and proud, an embodiment of their efforts, but also a symbol of their separation. Ethan turned to Nora, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice steadier than he felt. She nodded, but her smile was fleeting, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. "I will never forget you, Ethan. You've changed my life in ways I can't even begin to explain." "And you've changed mine," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You've shown me what it means to connect, to share, to love. I don't know how I'll go back to my old life without you." Nora stepped closer, reaching for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. "We're not truly apart, you know. No matter where I go, you'll always be a part of me, just as I will always be a part of you." Tears threatened to spill over Ethan's cheeks as he squeezed her hand tightly, the warmth of her touch grounding him in the moment. "I'll hold on to that," he said softly. "And if there's ever a way, I'll come find you." She smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her features even as her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I believe you. You're a remarkable man, Ethan." With a deep breath, they both turned toward the ship. Nora climbed aboard, her movements graceful yet heavy with emotion. Ethan followed her, helping her with the final adjustments as they prepared for the launch. He couldn't shake the feeling of finality that hung in the air, a weight pressing down on his heart. "Are you sure about this?" he asked one last time, desperation creeping into his voice. Nora paused, looking back at him, her expression one of resolute determination. "I have to go, Ethan. It's my home, and I can't leave it behind. But I promise you, this is not the end." With those words, she activated the ship's systems, and lights flickered to life around them. The hum of machinery filled the air, a comforting sound that contrasted sharply with the chaos of emotions swirling within Ethan. As the ship's engines roared to life, the ground vibrated beneath them, shaking with the force of impending flight. Nora turned to him, her eyes locking onto his, holding his gaze as if trying to imprint this moment in both their memories. "Thank you for everything, for your kindness, your courage, and for teaching me about your world." Ethan felt his heart break as he nodded, trying to smile through the tears that threatened to spill over. "You have given me so much more than you know. I'll cherish every moment we spent together." The ship began to lift off the ground, and Ethan watched as the world around him fell away, the treetops shrinking into the distance. Nora's face was a mixture of sadness and excitement, a reflection of the conflicting emotions that surged within him. As the ship ascended into the sky, Ethan raised his hand in farewell, a gesture filled with love and longing. Nora mirrored him, her eyes shining with tears as the distance between them grew. In that moment, they were both aware of the fragility of their connection, the delicate thread that bound their hearts despite the vastness of space separating them. With one last glance, Nora's ship vanished into the heavens, a shooting star crossing the twilight sky, leaving Ethan standing alone in the clearing. He felt the weight of the world settle on his shoulders as he turned back toward his cabin, the silence of the forest wrapping around him like a blanket. Though Nora was gone, the memories of their time together lingered like echoes in his mind, her laughter, her light, the way she had made him feel alive again. He knew he would never forget her, just as she had promised never to forget him. In the days that followed, Ethan found himself wandering through the forest, often lost in thought. He would visit their special places, each one a testament to the bond they had forged. He continued working on the mural, pouring his heart into it as a tribute to her, to their shared experiences, and to the beauty that came from their unexpected encounter. Slowly, the ache of loss began to transform into something else, a sense of purpose. Nora had ignited a spark within him, one that fueled his desire to explore the world anew, to embrace the unknown just as she had embraced her journey to Earth. Inspired by her bravery, he resolved to not only keep her memory alive, but also to continue seeking connection and understanding. not just with those who shared his world, but with the wider universe beyond. Ethan spent evenings beneath the stars, looking up at the vast sky and whispering her name, sending his thoughts into the ether. He knew she was out there, somewhere among the stars, and he believed with all his heart that their paths would cross again one day. With each passing season, he became more determined to honor the legacy of their time together. He delved into research about the cosmos, learning about the stars, planets, and the science behind space travel. He envisioned building a new vessel, one that could traverse the stars and possibly reunite them. Each discovery brought him closer to the dream he now held in his heart, a dream that one day he would find a way to reach her, to bridge the gap between their worlds and reignite the connection that had changed both their lives forever. And so, with Neera etched in his heart, Ethan embraced the unknown with a sense of wonder and determination, knowing that their story was far from over. Their adventure had merely transformed, shifting into something new, a promise of reunion and the exploration of a universe filled with infinite possibilities.